If the candidates could please come and have a seat, that will probably help everyone get started. We do apologize, there's not nearly as much room as we'd like, but we're so thrilled to see such a packed house here today for the Democratic Candidates Gubernatorial Forum. Thank you again so much for coming. I'm just going to say a few words. My name is Elise Hugas. I'm one of the co-founders of Engage Falmouth, and one of our missions here is to, thank you, along with a lot of other people here that have been contributing in various ways. One of our missions is to try to help the voters of this town get more and more informed, because as we know, as Thomas Jefferson has told us, the prerequisite for democracy is an informed electorate. So even on a beautiful spring day, the first one we've had so far, this is really gratifying. We're grateful that you're here. So we have had some questions submitted in advance for the candidates, and we are going to start with those after a brief introduction from each of our candidates, just to let you know. But there will be plenty of time for some questions. We are breaking up the questions by subject matter, so health, environment, etc. So please, if you have a question that falls under one of those categories, we're going to ask you that you submit it at that time and come up to. We'll be sending around a mic, so you'll be able to ask your question. Today's event is live streamed by Falmouth Community Television. So thanks to Falmouth Community Television for coming out. The wonderful crew, Bob, Tony, Deb, and of course the wonderful crew here is manning the cameras and womaning the cameras. So you will be able to watch later on Channel 13, but the event is being live streamed today on fctv.org. So all your friends and all the people at home who are here watching, please, and thank you for paying attention. We just want to note that cell phones would be great if you could turn them off, or at least put them on silent, and that goes for the candidates as well. Thank you very much. That's never happened before that phone has rung. So just have a few thank yous. The Cape and Islands Democratic Council was really instrumental in putting this event together, so big thanks to Sandy Milano and that whole crew. Of course, the Falmouth Democratic Town Committee, and Megan English-Braga in particular, so thank you very much. This whole event kind of got underway with a high school senior project, so Dan Gasson, thank you very much for being the impetus for this. Falmouth Public Library, which hosted this incredible forum and had a lot of help from staff from putting that together. And of course the candidates. We couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much for making the time to come here to Falmouth today. And so we're going to have a nice friendly forum. Just to underline that, this is not a debate, it is a forum. This is a chance for you all to get informed and for the candidates to get, introduce themselves to you. So we're going to start with Bob Massie, then go with Jay Gonzalez and Setti Warren with brief introductions, and then we'll open it up to some pre-submitted questions, and then open up the floor to you all. So thank you so much.
I need to use the mic. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Massie from the beautiful town of Somerville, where I've lived for 35 years with my wife, Ann, who's actually here. So, wait, come on, Ann. It's not quite as beautiful as Falmouth, I have to say, but it's a wonderful town. I'm running for governor because I've been all over this state. I've been in 250 communities now. And I have seen that many of the challenges that we face are getting worse. It may not always look like it, but they're getting worse. You'll remember that one of the core founders of the Democratic Party, Franklin Roosevelt, laid out his understanding of what our values are in the 1944 State of the Union address. And he said, to be free as Americans, our freedom as Americans depends on our ability to have a good home, a good school, a good doctor, and a good job. And you know that that's a hard thing now. Each one of them is hard. And it's very hard in some part of the state. So I want to be your governor so I can fight for better housing, so I can help stabilize rents, so I can make it possible for people to own a home. I want to be your governor because education is the key not only to our children's future, but to everybody's future. And I want to make sure that we have strong education programs from 0 to 99. You're in trouble if you're 100, I'm sorry. But yeah, no, 0 to 99. I want to fight for better health care. Health care is a deep concern across this state. Now, we do have Mass Health. We've made progress. We have a long way to go. I've had my own health challenges. I will talk a little bit about them later. But just to say, I was born with a serious illness called hemophilia. I couldn't walk as a child. My parents were terrified that they would be thrown off health insurance. So I want to fight for single-payer health insurance, health care. And I have held that position consistently for 40 years. And I believe I have the strength and capacity to do it. And our jobs, it can say we have a 3% unemployment rate, but you know as well as I do that many of those jobs are crappy jobs, and especially for the millennial generation. They are minimum wage jobs, no benefit jobs, independent contractor jobs. And I will fight to build local economies. I don't believe in big giveaways to corporations like GE and Amazon. Oh, that was a funny slip. I also believe that the motto of a governor is the same as the motto for the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts: be prepared. And we have to be prepared for a lot of stuff that's coming at us. Number one is climate change. I have worked on climate change for 26 years. And I have worked and hoped and asked for change and a response, and we have not gotten it. And as a result, so many communities across this state, including up and down Cape Cod, are experiencing things we should not have had to go through, but now we're going through them, and we need to be prepared, and we need to get ready for more problems. And as governor, I promise you, I would not only fight to adapt and be ready, but also to move us to 100% renewable energy. I'm going to pass around a plan that we put out that lays out how to do that. And I put all the suggestions and proposals on the back so this governor could read it without even opening it. I've worked on this for a very long time, and I believe I bring special force to this. And a transportation system that links us into one commonwealth. Every other economy in the world has understood that transportation is critical. And yet our governor hasn't done anything about it. So every single part of the state is suffering. I'll go through the list later. But it's a deep problem, and we should be planning now for high-speed rail and improved transportation everywhere. On the cover of the transportation plan I'm going to hand out, there's 2 Japanese bullet trains that are 15 years old, go 160 miles an hour. You could get to Boston in about half an hour. It's amazing what is being done. China has 12,000 miles of high-speed rail. United States, 0. 12,000 to 0. Who's in the lead? I want to fix that. Massachusetts should be leading it. It always has. So I've gotten a sign. Brevity is not my strength. But I just want to say we come from a tradition of leadership in Massachusetts and leadership in the United States. And to quote Dan Wolfe, who I talked to some time ago, he said, the gap between what we could do and what we are doing has never been greater. I want to close that gap with you. And I'd like your support to be the next governor of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. What a great crowd. It is good to be here with so many Democrats. I could stop there. Committed to that core American value that I think defines what our party is all about, and that is our commitment to progress. Now, my entire life, I've been surrounded by people who've proven our potential for progress. I worked for John Glenn, an American hero who literally reached for the stars and got there. I got to serve as a cabinet secretary for Governor Deval Patrick, and you all know his life story. It proves the American dream exists, and he never lost sight of all those continuing to reach for it. But no one taught me more about our potential for progress than my parents. My mom is from Cleveland, Ohio, and during college, she went away on a foreign exchange program to Spain. You see where this is going? 9 months later, she came back married to my 19-year-old Spanish father and pregnant with me. And I love telling that story to parents who have kids going on foreign exchange programs. It really freaks them out. It was tough at first. My mom, is this microphone working okay?
Oh, yeah.
There's feedback. There's feedback.
You're right under a speaker.
Is this better? Okay. Thank you, Setti. Appreciate it. So it was tough for my parents at first. My mom had to drop out of college to take care of me. My dad didn't speak English, and he'd never been to college. But he worked his way from laying bricks in a city sewer system to becoming a successful small businessman and a proud American citizen. My mom went back to college when I was in high school and became a public school teacher and a member of the teachers union. They put all 3 sons through college, and this year, against all odds, they will be celebrating their 48th wedding anniversary, which is incredible if you think about it, right? So through that, So through that example, and just through the way they parented us, they always encouraged us to set high expectations for ourselves. And they instilled in us a belief that with hard work and a little help, reaching those expectations was actually possible. Those values aren't unique to me and my family. Those are our values, American values. And no one has reached higher, worked harder, and accomplished more together than the incredible people of Massachusetts. Think about it. We started the Revolutionary War. We were the first to establish a public school and a public park, the first to recognize one's right to marry whoever you love. I'm just going to talk like this.
Yeah, we need a sound check.
It's killing me. The first to make universal health insurance coverage a reality. And the list goes on and on and on. This is who we are. We have always been a leader in this state. But we are not leading right now.
The TV needs it. It's live stream.
But we are not leading right now. Is that better?
It's where you're standing. It's where you're standing.
Okay. Better?
What happened?
I can give her speech straight.
Unamplified. How's that? Here's the...
Poor guy. He's trying to.
Well,
There's
it's bothering people, I think. So I'm just going to talk, if that's all right. My point is, we aren't leading right now. Not under Charlie Baker. And I've been frustrated by how little our governor's accomplished. But I've been much more frustrated, honestly, by how little he's even tried. It's not good enough to simply accept the world the way it exists and try to manage it better. We need a governor who's going to see the way the world should be and take us to that place. Let's aim high. Let's aim high. Let's be us. Let's give working families across this state a better deal, an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. If I'm your governor, I'll fight for a living wage, paid family leave, affordable housing, debt-free college. I will work to ensure that every single child and family in this state has access to high-quality, affordable childcare and preschool. A transportation system across this entire state that people can actually depend on to get to work on time. Crazy idea, right? A single-payer healthcare system that's simpler, cheaper, and does a better job keeping people healthy. This is a former health insurance CEO telling you we need to get rid of health insurance companies. And as the only candidate in this race, as the only candidate with experience working in the healthcare industry, I will get this done. Let's aim high when it comes to other big challenges we face, like climate change and the opioid epidemic and our broken criminal justice system. Let's aim high when it comes to taking on gun violence and have a governor that's actually going to work to strengthen our gun laws, not weaken them like Charlie Baker's threatening to do. Let's aim high when it comes to expanding opportunities for women and communities of color. Let's get serious about taking on sexual assault and harassment. If I'm governor, I'll keep a bright light on the Me Too movement and insist that we stop tolerating the intolerable. And most important, let's aim high when it comes to how we treat people. If I'm your governor, it won't matter what color you are, what your sexual orientation is, what you believe, whether you're from Falmouth or Freetown or just came to this country or have a disability or a transgender. I see you, I believe in you, and as your governor, I will work for you. We have always done better when we see our differences as strengths, and when we recognize that beneath those differences are many more similarities. When we treat each other with respect and dignity and love. So let's do it. Let's aim high. If we do, I know we can build a better future for everybody. It's the lesson my parents taught me. It's the American story. It's what the people of Massachusetts have proven over and over again. And it's what we should expect from our government and from ourselves. And that's why I'm running for governor. I'm offering an ambitious agenda to move us forward and the leadership experience to deliver on it. And if that's the type of candidate you want, if you believe we need to aim high, if you want Massachusetts to actually be a leader again, then I'm really hoping to earn your support, and I hope you will join our grassroots campaign. Thank you very much.
Okay, can we take a pause for the cause and see if we can have a mic check to make sure that there isn't feedback happening? So let's see what's going on with the mics, because there was, and we'll try, actually, I think we should test both of them. If you want, I can test them. Well, I mic'd myself. Well, no, you can't shut them all off. Okay, so is it a question of where we're standing? If you're right, are we sure though? Okay, we feel good? Yeah, I think standing, one of the speakers is right under here, and I think that causes feedback. I want to be sure. Okay, Setti Warren, continue, or be it.
How's it? Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? It is great to be with you. The first thing I'm going to do is recognize a very important person in this room, my stepmother, Martha Warren. Thank you, Martha, for supporting me throughout my childhood and life. You're wonderful. Give her a round of applause. Give her a round of applause. If you can't get your stepmother to support you for governor, you can't win, right? The second person I want to recognize, I want you to give a round of applause for your state rep. Raise your hand. Rep.
Oh, Dylan.
He's fighting. The rep and the senator need a governor who are going to work with you to address the needs of the Cape and the entire Commonwealth, right? So look, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm a lifelong public servant. Served in the Clinton White House, worked for Senator Kerry. I'm a third-generation combat veteran. I served as mayor of my hometown, Newton, for 2 terms, 8 years. Newton is the 10th largest city in the Commonwealth. And in the city of Newton, we have the second highest number of millionaires in the state. But yet at the same time, 1 in 8 of our households live at or below the poverty line. When I came home from Iraq in 2008 to run for mayor, Newton had a $40 million structural deficit, no rainy day fund or reserve, 2 of the worst conditioned school buildings in the state of Massachusetts, 1 AAA bond rating that was in danger of being downgraded. In the 8 years since I've been mayor, we've eliminated the $40 million structural deficit. We grew a rainy day fund that didn't exist to $22 million. We're building 5 new schools in the next 6 years, 3 of which are completed. Next is being constructed now. We're one of the only communities in the Commonwealth that went from 1 AAA bond rating to 2. We're rebuilding our roads, sidewalks, reinstating public safety officials that were lost before I became mayor and teachers, and we're reducing the achievement gap in Newton Public School. We got there because I changed the way we governed in Newton. All of the budgets I passed through the city council were based on outcomes for people, and they were transparent. And I wasn't afraid to raise revenue at the city level in my reelection. The same principles must apply to Beacon Hill. We've got to change the way we're doing business up there, make sure we're delivering budgets that are based on outcomes for people, the people of this Commonwealth, and we can't be afraid to raise revenue at the state level. Now, I got into this race because of what I believe the defining issue of our time is: economic inequality. And me and Charlie Baker have a very clear view of how to address economic inequality. I do believe in many of the policies and principles that you do, and certainly my colleagues do up here: $15 minimum wage, paid family leave, single-payer health care, all need to be put in place in the Commonwealth, right? In addition to that, I also believe we have got to ask people who are doing really well in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to contribute more so we can invest in things that matter and get this state moving in the right direction and address economic inequality. We should start with people making over $1 million a year or more. They should contribute more so we can invest in these areas. There are areas I want to go through before we get to our conversation with you. Education. Right now in the state of Massachusetts, there are districts that are laying off teachers, hundreds of teachers. We have got to revamp the Chapter 70 formula that funds public education in the state of Massachusetts so that we actually have funding from the state that reflects the needs of every child in every district in this state. And we need to add to public education after school enrichment, summer enrichment, early childhood, and I believe in free public college, lifelong, with paid apprenticeships included. We've got to ask people who are doing really well to contribute more so that we can make these investments. We've all sat in gridlock traffic, right, around the state of Massachusetts. We've all driven over roads and bridges that are falling apart. This governor believes in privatization and no new revenue. We've got to invest in public transportation, that system that includes high-speed rail down to the Cape, building up our regional transit authorities, repairing our roads, our sidewalks, our bridges, so that we can get people where they need to go and get these cars off. Lastly, I want to talk about the opioid epidemic. And I know you know about it more than some of the other places in the state of Massachusetts. Since 2014, 7,000 people have died of opioid addiction in the state of Massachusetts. Over 5 people a day are dying of opioid addiction in the state of Massachusetts. We know that this is at a cost of $10 billion annually to the Commonwealth, including the human toll, healthcare costs, criminal justice costs, and loss of the economy. I've done a series of 9 town halls around the Commonwealth around this issue because I believe we need to put a spotlight on it. We need to destigmatize this issue. I'm hearing more beds are needed, more clinicians are needed. I'm hearing we need on-the-ground, wraparound services that are lifelong for people with addiction. And we got to do it now because this is an epidemic. And we've got to ask people who are doing really well to contribute more so that we can invest in our fellow human being and treat people with addiction. We can no longer afford embracing Charlie Baker's low expectations when it comes to educating our children, fixing our roads and sidewalks and putting transportation in place, and treating people with addiction. We can do better. We must do better. And that's why I got into this race to tell the truth about how to address the difficult challenges in the Commonwealth. I hope to earn your support. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now we have some questions that were sent in, and we organized them by topic. So first, let me explain a few things. You'll have 2 minutes to respond to each of the questions. As we said before, it's not really a debate, so there's no rebuttal or need for time for that. When we open up questions to the floor, I would ask that people think about questions that are specific to the state level. So anything that's a town issue, you just missed town meeting, so you had your chance. County issues, not really relevant here, nor is federal. So we should really hone in on what someone in this position can do. And secondly, ask a question that can be applied to all 3 candidates. Otherwise, it's not fair that one person gets to speak about his experience and the other candidates do not. So first, I guess we're talking about electability since we had the introduction. And why did you decide to run for governor? Check, that's already been done. Another question, and we will start this with Jay Gonzalez, if you will. What experiences have qualified you for this position, in your opinion?
So, I would argue, I'm going to guess these guys may disagree.
No. What? They only have 2 minutes, so, well, you should have come earlier. I don't know what to say.
I'll stand, that's fine. Yeah.
Because we have,
Okay. So, as I was saying, I'm guessing these guys may disagree, but I think my experience best positions me to deliver on the type of ambitious agenda we all want and to actually win this election against Charlie Baker. So I'm the only candidate in this race with leadership experience and a record of success in both the public and private sectors and leadership experience in state government. I worked for Governor Patrick, was his Secretary of Administration and Finance, oversaw the state budget during the Great Recession, and also was often the governor's point person for negotiating a lot of the big reforms we got through the legislature during that time, like transportation reform and healthcare cost containment reform. So I've been there. I've done it. I know how the process works and have worked successfully through it. It's not going to matter what we all want to do unless we actually deliver on it. And I think based on that experience, I'm best positioned to do that. I also think I'm well positioned to take on Charlie Baker. His whole case for being governor is he's a great manager. He's actually failed at it. We eerily have similar backgrounds. He was Secretary of Administration and Finance for Bill Weld. I was for Deval Patrick. He was CEO of a health insurance company. I was CEO of a health insurance company. I'm going to be able to credibly take him on and expose his failings as a manager. I'm going to be able to say things like, hey, when I was there in state government, managing the state budget during much tougher times, we managed to do that successfully while increasing investment to record levels in important areas like education and infrastructure. We got the highest bond ratings in state history, and you screwed it up, Baker. You just got downgraded by one of the rating agencies because you're not following the responsible policies that I put in place when I was there. So he's going to have his hands full with me trying to claim that he's a great manager. And I think based on that experience, I'm going to be able to take him on, expose those failings, and win this election.
thank you. Setti.
This is how I see this question. Last year, for the first time in 30 years, the bond rating of the state of Massachusetts was downgraded by Standard & Poor's. And in that downgrading report, they said that Charlie Baker was playing games and gimmicks to keep these budgets afloat. Here's the reality, folks. For decades, Beacon Hill has not been honest about how they do budgeting. We are not taking in enough money to pay for what we're doing right now. What we need to do is change how business is done up there. I'm the only candidate in this race that's been on the ballot elected as a chief executive. The buck stopped at my desk. I'm also the only candidate in this race that ran and won an election on raising taxes in my hometown. And I'm also the only candidate in this race that can look people in the eye and say, not only did I raise taxes, but we were accountable to every single one of those dollars. We were transparent, and we changed the way we operated. We based our budgets on outcomes for people. Don't let anyone tell you that a progressive isn't responsible with money. We were accountable, and we not only were responsible, but we turned around Newton's financial outlook. The same things have to happen on Beacon Hill. That's what I bring to this race in the fall. I'm the candidate, I believe, that can look Charlie Baker in the eye and the people of Massachusetts in the eye and say, we got to change the way we're doing business up there. Here's how I did it in Newton. Here's how we can do it on Beacon Hill so that we can address the needs of every single person in this state. I'm prepared to do it.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that question because we're entering an interesting and maybe delicate part of the campaign because we need to explain our differences. We're trying not to attack each other, but there are differences. So number one is my background. I am a lifelong social justice activist, a minister ordained 35 years ago who became so concerned about our structures as an economy that I got a doctorate from Harvard Business School, which I've used not to make money, but to fight for people who have less. Number two, I'm actually the only person up here who's won a statewide election. I was the nominee for lieutenant governor, and I won. Number three, I have deep experience making structural change. I've been committed to my hometown of Somerville for 35 years, but my background led me into running something called Ceres, a coalition of big pension funds and activists who use the shareholder power to move the biggest corporations in the country toward equal rights, towards gender equity, towards fighting climate change, and a whole long list. I was the head of an organization called the Global Reporting Initiative, which holds companies accountable by forcing them to disclose what they're doing. This is now the global standard in many parts of the world. I also founded the Investor Network on Climate Risk, which is an alliance of pension funds worth $27 trillion. I brought those folks together. I focused them on the future, and we executed against that plan. And I also understand the global economy. It's perfectly fine to understand the state executive. I get that, and I honor Jay's background. But this isn't just about management. This is about leadership. And I believe I've shown the capacity to see into the future. I believe I've shown the capacity to define a pathway, and I've gotten it done. And I want to bring those skills and the knowledge of where the world is going to this state. I want to inspire people to move forward. If necessary, I want to push big institutions forward. And if finally we have to do it, I want to require them to move forward. But I want to start with inspiring them. I believe that if you're comparing two management candidates, the one who's already in the job is likely to win. I believe that a blue wave is coming and are ready for a person with my values and my experience.
Okay, so now we'll move to some questions more specifically about issues. The first topic I'd like to bring up is housing. Lack of affordable housing is an increasing social inequity. So our communities are less diverse, less inclusive. What do you see as the state's role in helping the Cape increase its supply of affordable year housing? I know this is an issue not just on the Cape, but pretty much statewide. Setti Warren, would you like to go first, please?
Is that a question or a request?
There are two questions in that question.
Look, when I was the mayor of Newton, it was very difficult to put affordable housing in my city. For years, the city council controlled permitting, special permits, zoning changes. In my second term, what I decided to do for the first time in Newton's history is put forth a proactive housing strategy, specific places where we could do development to build affordability, change the rules on increasing the numbers of units by allowing people to by right to build accessory apartments, upping the percentage and requirement for developers to build affordability in my city. The state needs to have a strategy. It does not. Right now, 351 cities and towns it's up to them to try to figure this out. So three things I think that's going to be important. One, we do need some zoning changes at the state level. There's zoning legislation that your former senator, had been a part of writing that would include making it legal for cities to require developers to build a certain percentage of affordable units, that would ask cities and towns to identify areas where they would build multifamily units, by right ability for people to build accessory apartments. Those and some other changes that are important. I support that legislation. Secondly, we need to subsidize affordable housing. We need to subsidize affordable housing. The federal government has abdicated its responsibility over the course of the last 30 years, cut things like CDBG funds and home funds so that we don't have the money. Charlie Baker cut affordable housing money last year. So we got to invest in subsidizing units. And third, we've got to connect it to transportation. I never talk about housing unless it's connected to planning for transportation, as well as making sure we're growing good, higher paying jobs where people live. All three of those things are connected. I would have my cabinet agencies, Mass DOT, economic development, on the ground in every region of this state, putting a plan together for building units making sure we get the zoning changes in place, and making sure we have the resources so we could subsidize and build.
Massie.
We have an upside-down economy. It is moving money out of local communities and up to Wall Street, where it's being gambled away. And even more seriously, we have a problem. Capitalism, markets, they do good things, but they have to be controlled by democracy. And right now, democracy is being pushed to serve capitalism. Now, in relation to housing, what does this mean? It means that the market cannot solve this by itself. Markets left to themselves are going to be build fancy housing for rich people. So we have to be able to step back and put in place what will actually help people. I mean, let me give you a quick example. There's a Millennium building in Boston that's largely empty. If we had put a transaction tax on that of 1%, it could have funded thousands of subsidies. It's empty. It's being owned by rich people. So foreign, many cases. So we need to expand the amount of housing. We need to open up alternative models for housing ownership. I mean, the key here is that we have a wage problem and we have a wealth problem. People don't make enough and they don't have enough to invest in houses and homes. We need to create alternative forms of financing. And there's a lot of steps, like the accessory dwelling, being able to add apartments, a lot of things that we can do. I'm very lucky because my wife is a professor of architecture, an expert on housing, and we're a team. And so she'll be the co-governor for housing, and she's right here. And I honor her for that. But we need leadership. We need someone who can say, it's not working. We need someone who has looked people in the eyes who are homeless. We had a young homeless woman living with us for a month. She made $11 an hour working out at Logan at night. $11 an hour gets you $1,600 a month, and the apartment in Somerville is $2,300 a month. Yeah. So there's the gap. Before you put down a deposit, before you pay for anything else, and on top of that, as an African-American young woman, she faces relentless institutional racism, which keeps her out of homes that she should require. So rents are crushing people and causing displacement. Ownership is out of reach. And as a result, we have to recognize that, and then we have to put in place the steps that will allow the market to do what it does, but to protect people and to give them that right of American freedom that Roosevelt identified as a good home. Thank you.
So we have a crisis in this state when it comes to affordable housing. It is one of the things, I would say, next to transportation, that is dragging Massachusetts backwards. And we need to treat it like the crisis that it is. First and foremost, we need to exercise basic leadership skills on this, which our current governor has not done. What is the scope of the problem across the state? What do we need to do in each of the different regions of the state, because the problem looks different in each different region? What do we need to do to address it? What's our plan going to be to do so? And let's execute against the plan. None of that has happened, and it would if I were governor. To the point about how the affordable housing crisis looks different in different parts of the state, the Cape workforce housing I know is a big issue. I was meeting with some Falmouth activists before this forum who were talking about how lots of young people who grew up here can't afford to come back here. I know seasonal housing is a big issue for the tourism, to support the tourism industry on the Cape, which is the biggest industry here. So we need to take the particular challenges that exist here and develop a plan that's going to address those challenges. I think it needs to include regulatory reform. There are parts of this state where we are taking community interests into account at the expense of actually building additional affordable housing that we desperately need. We got a better balance, strike that balance. I think we've got to do a better job of coordinating the subsidies that exist in state government right now. They exist in all these different buckets at all these different state agencies, working in isolation, not coordinating, not being as effective as we could be, driving toward one common strategic plan in each region of the state. And transportation, I agree, needs to be part of our affordable housing solution too. There is affordable housing in the South Coast, for example. That could be an affordable housing solution if we've got a good transportation connection
Right.
for the Cape. So we've got to think differently about this problem. First and foremost, we need to plan, and we need to execute against the plan.
Thank you. So I would now like to invite any questions from the audience that have to do with housing. So if there's any, is there anyone here who, yes, there's a woman in mauve. We're gonna, our favorite high school senior and hero, Dan, will bring you the mic. Not all heroes wear capes.
Before the
Please stand.
crash, I believe that one of the Dakotas, either North Dakota or South Dakota, had a state bank. And they didn't have a mortgage crisis there. All the rest of us did. What do you think about developing or creating a state bank for our state?
We're gonna start with, oh yeah, Bob, that's right, sorry, right? Setti? No, I think we start with Setti Warren. I've lost track. Oh, did you? All right, we'll start with Bob. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I have lost. Bob Massie, would you please answer first?
What a great question. My mic's up. What a great I'm okay? All right. This is a wonderful example of innovation that's taking place perhaps in unlikely places. Now, the North Dakota Bank is a public bank that does very specific things. But one of the things it does not do is invest in risky projects, crazy financial innovations, collateral debt obligations, where you go down a list of really nutty stuff. Instead, they stayed invested in their real economy. I used to run something called the New Economy Coalition, and we looked at that, and there are 200 organizations that are working hard to strengthen local economies, to make sure local money stays there, not to give money to GE or Amazon or other things that take money out of state. And just let me say, one of the things that takes money out of state is fossil fuel. $18 billion a year of fossil fuel. We need to be thinking about how to build local economies in every region. And that was an excellent example and something that I would, and in fact talked about and have proposed, that we have these mechanisms, and without getting too technical, what they do is they lower the risk that other, frankly, more chicken commercial banks aren't willing to take on. They need somebody to take the lead, and they also stabilize. And so North Dakota, as you said, did not go through a banking crisis. Neither did Canada, which has similar stability. We removed Glass-Steagall. We removed the barrier between banking and investment banking, and they went nuts. They took our money and gambled it away, lost $7 trillion. Nobody went to jail except everybody in the lower income community who found that they were imprisoned in their own lives. So this was an outrage, and there are steps that we can move forward. And frankly, if we move at the ballot box, we will bring this to the attention of all the elites who don't care, who don't understand, and don't want to move forward. This governor, he and I went to business school at the same time. He's still trapped in the 1980s. I am moving forward into the 21st century, and I have specific experience with the organizations that are making the most progress on this that I'd like to bring into that corner office so people can hear about them and we can move forward.
Jim.
So thank you for the question. I think that's the first time we've ever gotten this question. And to be honest, I don't know all the details of what North Dakota did with their bank, if that is the state that has a state bank. I would be open. I think we do need to think differently about addressing this affordable housing crisis and what the state's role is. Of course, state and federal governments have always played a regulatory role, and there wasn't enough regulation, which is what caused the housing crisis and the recession the last time. There are some instruments we have through government where we could, that are already helping to provide low-cost mortgages to people. Mass housing provides single-family loans and on a subsidized basis, and multifamily housing development loans. I was on the board of Mass Housing when I worked in state government. we could take a fresh look at what it's doing and whether it is being as aggressive as it can be or should be to help address this crisis that we have across this state. I'm open to thinking differently and new ideas. There are trade-offs and risks. If we have a state bank, you know, how are we going to protect taxpayers at the end of the day if taxpayers are going to be on the hook? If there were a similar crisis or defaults because we're being more aggressive in terms of the types of loans that a state bank is making versus private banks. So I think we just need to be thoughtful about how we assess these opportunities, but we should be assessing these opportunities. And I agree with Bob, we've got a governor right now who sees the way the world is, accepts it as it is, says what based on what we have, what's the best we can do, instead of where do we need to be and how do we get there. And that is the mindset at which I would approach this issue and every other.
It's a great question. I am not familiar with the North Dakota State Bank proposal. I'm happy to take a look at it. I too think we need to look at other states, what they're doing, their innovations, and put everything on the table, see if it works. Here's what I do believe. We should actually invest and scale up what quasi-public mass housing is doing. We should make sure they're expanding their capacity, for example, to provide agreements with people where they don't have to put any money down to buy a home. We should expand the opportunities for rent-to-own possibilities here in the state of Massachusetts. But I want to go back to something that I said a little earlier, because we have to deal with this revenue issue, folks. We have to deal with the fact that Ronald Reagan in 1980 sold everyone in the United States a bill of goods. And here's what it was. If we just reduce government, make it as small as possible, privatize, and then give huge tax cuts to the wealthiest corporations and people in the country, that money will trickle down. And somehow, if you just bootstrap your way, you're going to be successful. It was a lie. This thinking has been pervasive in Washington, and it has also been pervasive in state houses across the country, including this one in Beacon Hill, for decades. This is why we have a crisis around housing. This is why we have 2 districts in the state of Massachusetts, school districts, suing the state of Massachusetts because they've lost hundreds of teachers. This is why we have broken down bridges. We have the worst commuter rail system in the country. Federal data just came out. We're ranked 47th in infrastructure and roads. We have got to be honest, and here's what I believe. Donald Trump just gave one of the largest tax cuts in American history to multinational corporations and people with extreme wealth. We ought to ask those entities to contribute more so that we can invest in subsidizing housing here in the state and on the Cape. I mean, we have to be honest about this revenue issue, and we have to go right at it. Val Patrick used to have a saying, Democrats need to grow a backbone and look people in the eye and say, yeah, we're going to ask those people in and around those corporations, we're going to ask those people, some of them live in my city, to ask them to pay a little bit more in taxes, be a little bit more in taxes so we can make the investment and address this housing crisis that we have.
Thank you. Oh, we have several. Okay, yes, in orange.
It seems that permit restrictions in cities and towns don't allow for a lot of affordable housing, and that you must have either a half-acre lot or whatever. And how would you, as governor, address that issue that really gets in the way of affordable housing?
Yes, thank you.
What is your name, ma'am? Marty? Thank you for the question. This is a big place where state government can play a role. There are many communities across this state that are not living up to their responsibility, in my view, to allow for the production of additional affordable housing from both very low income to workforce housing, where we are very deficient all across this state. And our state laws that apply, that municipalities need to live within in terms of zoning, are not requiring enough of our municipalities, in my view. And so what happens is at the local level, with the exception of places like Somerville and Cambridge and Boston, which have been increasing the supply of affordable housing, in most other communities, it's not happening at all. And that's a real problem, not only for the people in those communities who can't afford to buy housing, or those who want to live in those communities who can't afford to buy housing, but it is a problem for us collectively and for our economy, which is dependent on a workforce being able to afford housing and live near where they're working. And if we can't, we got to strike a better balance. And so what I'm proposing to do as governor is pass state legislation that would reform zoning laws, state zoning laws, to make sure we're accounting for local interests and considerations, but that we are creating additional affordable housing in communities across this state, so that we live up to that collective responsibility. Because if we don't have enough affordable housing across this state, it is going to start dragging Massachusetts further and further behind. Because businesses won't want to locate here if their workers can't afford housing here. People won't want to live here because they can't afford housing. And we've got to get serious about this. And we have been playing footsie on this issue for too long, I think, and being too deferential to municipalities at the municipal level. Municipalities need to step up and figure out the best way in their municipality to help relieve this crisis.
You're absolutely correct. This is, when I was mayor, it's very difficult to get through affordable housing special permits. As I said, we have 24 city councilors that control whether or not a building or a project is permitted or not, and a zoning change, which is why we absolutely need to pass Senator Wolf's and others, their legislation on Beacon Hill that would change the rules for municipalities so that they do not have as much control. We've got to make sure for example, as I said, one of the things I was able to do before I left as mayor was allow by right, for example, the ability for people to build accessory apartment on their single family home in Newton. Before that, you had to go through the city council, 24 councilors. Certain places allowed it, certain places didn't. We changed that in Newton. We have to do that at the state level. That's in Senator Wolf's bill. We should require cities and towns to identify areas where they would allow for multifamily units. There are cities and towns that have areas that there are cities and towns that don't allow for that. We ought to require that. We ought to make sure, for example, as I said, we should allow by law for cities to keep in place and require a percentage of affordable units that a developer would have to build. Not just affordable, but moderate income they would have to build so that when these developments go up, we're building affordability as well. Those are some examples of what's in Senator Wolf's legislation that I would support. We got to get behind that so it changes the rules, and we also have to make sure we're subsidizing so that we can build. But we do have to change the rules if we're going to get to where we need to go.
We're probably one of the relatively few families that talks about zoning at dinner. And that's because, again, my wife knows a great deal about this. And I agree with the specific steps that have been offered as governor. I would embrace them. And one thing, we've been listening to each other for a while, and we've been adopting the good ideas that we're coming up with. I would like to go to a little deeper point here. A lot of what's going on is fear or anxiety. What will this mean? How will my community change? And so that tension between our longer-term goals that the state might be seeking and the concern that local people have, those are legitimate and endless tensions. But what I would say is there's some things, we need a governor to show that things are changing. So as I talk to young people, one of the things they say is our parents, our grandparents, look at us, we're struggling with housing. They say, well, we'll just go get a job and get an apartment and buy a house. It isn't that way anymore. For those of you who may have grown up in a different generation, it isn't that way anymore. The other thing is we fear difference. I grew up with hemophilia. I had leg braces as a child. People were afraid of me when I walked into a room. But we need to embrace difference. We need to embrace diversity. We want different people from different backgrounds, from different classes to come together. That's healthy. So I think one of the things a governor can do, and I would do as governor, is both to address the specific government actions, but also to set a tone of leadership on these generational differences, these differences across race and class, because we need to be one Commonwealth. We need to come together. We need to understand that it's not just the questions of one town or two towns on the Cape, it's the whole state. And it's what we become. And I just want to say, in order to help wake the people in Beacon Hill up, I promised to move the governor's office for 2 days a month to a community that is often overlooked. And that means that not only do we put attention on the questions and bring legislators and all the local leaders together to talk, but here's the thing. We bring people from the State House and from Boston to all the parts of the state, central, western, all the different parts of the state, so they can see parts of the state they may never have seen. Now here in the Cape, probably a lot of people have come down here, but they don't understand the problems you're facing. I'd just like to wrap up. Somerville was the key location of affordable workforce housing for the 19th and early 20th century. And the way we did it is we built triple deckers. And we allowed someone to buy a triple decker, and then they would live in the first floor, put mom and pop in the second floor to help with the kids, and rent out the third floor. That built equity. So people had the chance to build wealth. Now they've all been turned to condos. So in addition to the zoning problems and the accessory dwellings and the different forms of ownership, we have to think about how to build wealth for people at the bottom. That's something we used to have more mechanisms for than we do today. And as governor, I would lead us forward, push us forward, and if absolutely necessary, require us to move forward together.
Thank you for that. All right, I do see some hands. However, we need to move to some other topics, and there will be, if we can get through all of our topics, there will be additional time at the end for just open floor. I'm moving on to education. So we just have one question here from the podium on education. What do you think should be done to improve public education in this state and to close the achievement gap? Now, this question also brings into mind things like charter schools and the cost of higher education, their state education. So what do you feel that we should be doing on the state level? And so if you went last, that means you go first this time. Right?
Okay, great. We need more money. I go around, I see so many communities that are trying to do the right thing, but they're just getting hammered. They're getting hammered for a lot of reasons. One thing is costs are going up. We're facing rising healthcare costs. I've talked to so many leaders in towns that say, I want to put more money in teachers, but our health premiums went up and we can't do it. And for some communities in the western part, and I don't know if it applies here, but as you move toward regional schools, you can raise your hand if this is as you move toward regional schools, there's a shift in the burden on transportation. The state promised to solve this and then backed away for that. So as transportation costs go up, the challenges go down. I mean, the challenges get harder and opportunities go down. So I want to pass the Fair Share Amendment, because that will redistribute about $1 billion to education. But we need a comprehensive plan that goes from 0 to 99, as I said before. And that means that not only kindergarten, but pre-kindergarten, even 0 through 3. We need to re-examine how we teach. You know, we're still teaching in a lot of ways that were good in the 19th century. We don't do medicine like we did in the 19th century, but we do teaching. We need to be ready to move our kids forward through our community colleges, through our technical schools, through our four-year colleges. I used to be at UMass Boston, and I saw so many kids working hard. They had to work 2 jobs now at a crappy campus that is in debt. There's so many fundamental problems, and we have lost the commitment of America to education as part of building our economy and citizenry. So I believe I'm aware of the challenges coming at us, which include artificial intelligence, which are going to kill many of the jobs we're preparing kids for. I believe we have to find that funding, which we could have if we had not lowered our income tax so much, and many other things. But ultimately, it is about building a common vision of the future, because people don't want to pay more taxes unless they share that idea of where we could go. And I think many of you know where we should go, but we need to express that, and we need to build the support, and then we will find the way to more money and into the future.
So I believe the most fundamental responsibility we have collectively through government is to ensure that every single child has access to a great public education. Period. The most important thing we do. And I'll tell you what my strategy would not be. Would not be to try to create a few more charter schools for a few more kids. Which, regardless of whether you believe the quality's better or not, what about all the kids who are left in the regular public schools whose resources are getting drained away as we increase the number of charter schools? We can't be creating a competitive school system in our public school system. There can't be winners and losers. Every school needs to be great. First and foremost, we need to invest more in public education. There have been studies done. We are underfunding, the state is underfunding the amount of support it needs to provide, particularly to lower income, urban, rural districts around this state. It's one of the reasons I also support the millionaire's tax. We need to invest more in our public schools. There are a lot of other things I think we need to do. I think we need to be testing less. It's crowding out the amount of time we're spending providing kids with a well-rounded education. I think we need to empower teachers, not blame them. They are the most important component of providing a great quality education within the walls of the school. We need to recognize the fact that what happens outside of the walls of the school largely impacts a child's ability to learn in the school. If somebody is growing up in an environment where they're hungry or they don't have stable housing or they're living in an abusive environment, how do we expect them to do well in school? So I think we need social workers in every school, particularly lower income districts, who are working with families and children to make sure they're connected to the supports they need to ensure that children's lives are as stable as they can be. Lastly, early education and childcare. This is my top priority. I've committed to ensure that every single child and family in this state has access to high quality childcare and preschool. The evidence on this is game changing. For kids that have access to it, particularly lower income kids, their success in school and in life is on a different trajectory, and we need to do it.
When I was the mayor of Newton, I sat on my school committee. Here's what I saw. I saw kids coming into Newton Public Schools from lower income households, going to the same classrooms as kids from wealthier households, and an achievement gap started to develop. Same classrooms. And I saw this, and I understand very clearly that kids coming out of low income households aren't any less smarter than the kids coming from wealthier households. It's just that they're not getting the supports and interventions that they need to succeed when they go into those classrooms. So here's what I believe. We have an unequal system here in the state of Massachusetts. We've got an outdated state funding formula called Chapter 70 that's primarily driven by population that is resulted in the loss of educators all across this state for years. Hundreds of teachers are being lost. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure we redo that formula so it does, in fact, reflect the needs of every single child in every district in this state. We also need to add to public education after-school enrichment, summer enrichment, and early childhood. We've got to make these investments. 80% of a child's life is spent outside of a classroom. On average, it costs $19,000 a year to send a child to an early childhood program in the state of Massachusetts. And a lot of places, there's a long line, can't even get in. So we've got to make sure we're putting in place the programs to support our kids so that they can also be successful. Lastly, higher ed. It is a disaster what is happening on the state level. You're watching this situation play out on the news every single day. We've got a governor that has continually cut state and community college. Many of those students are living in situations where they can't afford to actually finish the degree that they started. 22% of people that start higher ed don't finish. Many of them are taking on crushing debt. Many of them are homeless in state and community college. I've sat down with students. So this is why we've got to be honest. 50 years ago, you could work your way through school. It's impossible, folks. Can't happen with the debt and the cost of living. This is why we have got to invest in making public higher ed free. Free. Not debt-free, but free. Just like high school. And we've got to have apprenticeships that are paid, that are ensconced in that, and it's got to be lifelong because people need to go back to school in order to get credentials they need to compete in this economy. And we also need to invest in services within public higher ed because a lot of students need social services. They need to make sure, a lot of them are working moms. They've got kids. So we've got to make sure we have those services embedded. We've got to make sure that we're not just hanging on to adjunct professors and not paying them what they should. We got to make sure we have full-time faculty there as well so that we can get our folks prepared for this economy and they can make ends meet in it.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to remind our candidates to please stick to the time because we want to open it up at the floor for the floor at the end. There is a question here. This gentleman with the glasses and the purple sweater. It's kind of a, I don't know what color it is.
This is sort of a global question that encompasses all of the issues. These issues are systemic. They've been with us for a long time. And they were there during the Patrick administration, and he had a Democratic legislature to work with. Reflecting upon that administration, what would you do differently?
Okay, I'm going to start with Setti because I skipped you last time. I'm sorry. So Setti Warren can begin this time. I did it wrong because my brain doesn't work.
Thank you. Look, to your point, this situation we're in didn't just start with Baker. This is decades of games going on Beacon Hill, not being honest about revenue. What would I do? How would I look at this? Couple of things. We can't be afraid to call out our own party when they're not doing the right thing. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I got to tell you something, folks. Charlie Baker just gave the State of the State a couple months ago, got up there, was proud to say no new revenue. I called him out on it. I said he was wrong, and so did Speaker Bob DeLeo. And I said to the Speaker respectfully, I disagree with your stance on no new revenue. We can't be afraid to challenge our own party. That's one. The second thing is, when I raised taxes in Newton, I put that tax ballot on the ballot in 2013 in my reelection year. Leading up to that, Newton had only passed one since the inception of Prop 2.5. These are hard to do. Newton had a strong property tax base, so I could do it. Most of these towns can't raise property taxes, right? But we could. I did 80 town halls in my first term. I brought people into the process. And I made sure that all the budgets leading up to that override in 2013, I got elected in 2009, were based on outcomes for people. I had one of my town halls, I got a chair thrown at me. I hope that doesn't happen today. People were so mad I wanted to raise their taxes. But we have to do the same thing in regard to Beacon Hill. We've got to open up the process. We've got to have transparency around these budgets. They need to be based on outcome. Right now, if you look on mass.gov, it's a bunch of line items with acronyms and departments that you probably have no idea, nor do I. We've got to make sure that when we put these budgets together, my House 1 will reflect a level service budget. And what does that mean? How much money does it take right now to pay for what we're doing right now in the state? I sent a letter to Charlie Baker, Stan Rosenberg, and Speaker DeLeo last year. I asked them to provide a level service budget. I never got an answer. The reason why I never got an answer from Charlie Baker is because he knows what I know. We are not taking in enough money to pay for what we're doing right now. So we got to put that out there. I want to have 5-year revenue projections, not just 1 year. This is what we did in Newton. Everything I'm saying we did in Newton, straighten out the deal. And then bring people into the process, because at the end of the day, your representatives, the people that work for you up there, they need to hear from you. And if they're not armed with the information, they're not going to hear from you. So that we will continue the dysfunction that we've had and we don't deliver the services we need, the education we need, the transportation we need, the housing we need, and treating this epidemic the way we should. That's how I would change things.
Sure. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
So I'm going to take exception a little bit with Setti's description of, for decades, things have been terrible on Beacon Hill. When I was there working with Governor Patrick, every single thing that Setti recommends we do in terms of transparency and budgeting, We actually did when I was in charge. And Charlie Baker ripped all that down. So it's one of the reasons why we achieved the highest bond ratings in state history when I was there. We made some progress during the Patrick years. We invested at record levels in higher education campuses and in capital investments. We increased funding for public education to the highest levels in state history during that time, even though the biggest challenge we had was we were living through, my timing was terrible, being in charge of the state budget during the Great Recession, the worst fiscal crisis the state had faced in decades, where tax revenue went like that. So it was a really challenging time. Now, I will say to your question about what could we do differently, Governor Patrick actually did, you may remember, propose raising $2 billion of additional revenue to fund education and transportation. And the problem with the way that we went about it at that time was we got in a room by ourselves and developed this very complicated tax reform proposal that would have reformed the tax code, simplified it, and generated a lot of new money for transportation education. No one was engaged in the process of working on that, legislators or stakeholders, and we dropped it on everyone. And it was dead on arrival. I learned from that, and I would govern very differently. And there were a lot of successes we had in the Patrick administration because we didn't approach big legislation reforms that way. We actually engaged legislators up front and stakeholders up front to get their input and incorporate that input so we had buy-in and people invested to get it done. I've learned from those experiences. I worked and helped lead a lot of those successes. The revenue proposal was not a success in the Patrick administration. I've learned from that, and I agree. We need to ask. We need additional revenue to take on these education challenges. I've been there. I've done it. I know how the process works. I've learned from the failures, and I would approach it in a way that is inclusive, where we get legislators involved and stakeholders involved to ensure we get these big changes done, like getting the revenue we need to invest in our education system.
Deval Patrick is a good friend of mine, as he is a friend of all three of us. And I know that he meant well, and I agreed with many things he tried to do, but I did not agree, for example, with his push for casinos, which I thought was wrong. Wrong economically, wrong morally. I also think there are good people on Beacon Hill, good reps, good senators, but let's face it, we need to throw open the windows up there and let some clean air in, because the reality is that it's a stuffy place that is not paying attention to the rest of the world. Let me give you an example. 30 years ago, the Prime Minister of Norway laid out an agenda for the future that involved pursuing a just and sustainable future so that we matched prosperity and progress on the environment. This word sustainability, has swept the planet. It is at the heart of most government policies. It's the heart of of what most international businesses say they're trying to do. They don't always do it, but they talk about it. That word has never come out of Charlie Baker's mouth. And in fact, I don't think the people on Beacon Hill understand it. So we're sitting in Massachusetts thinking we're great, we're America, we're number one, and yeah, we don't know what's going on. So here's the reality. Jay, respectfully, talks about his experience. I understand that experience, and I honor it. I just don't think people necessarily want to go back to the Patrick administration. I think people want to go forward, and they want someone who has a new view, who has leadership skills, demonstrated international leadership skills, who also cares a great deal about Massachusetts, has worked for stuff here, worked at the national level, but we have to catch up now. And that's going to require both the vision for where we need to go and this sense of what other countries are doing, which people, we have a very good friend who was the Minister of the Environment for Denmark. They have half of their electricity coming from wind. I brought her here, I brought her up to Beacon Hill, and people were just stunned. This actually exists? We thought it was science fiction. No, it's not. So I believe that to address these questions, we need to combine expertise, management, that's all great. I think we could have pushed for single payer, or at least raised it under Governor Patrick. We could have pushed for sustainability. We could have done a lot more for climate change. There were 8 years in office And again, I like and love Governor Patrick, but we didn't fully catch the wave of progress that we should, and now we need to.
Okay, I'm going to send out 2 more questions from the podium, and then we will open it up to the floor for a free-for-all.
Can I just
scares
apologize?
me a little
We
bit.
are having trouble with the time, but I can't quite see you. I tend to be over here.
Okay.
And so when you stand up, you're not in my peripheral vision. And as I said, brevity is not my specialty.
I might-
Well, jump up and down,
I might have to be more assertive.
throw
like-
something at me, but right now I apologize. I think we're all having
Yeah.
trouble.
You guys have all violated equally.
Yeah. True. Very
That's
true.
always good to hear.
Very true. Okay, I'd like to talk about something that hasn't come up yet, which is gender inequality. So I've been to a number of these forums in the past little bit, and there are always 3 men at the table with the mics. We've never had a female governor. Oh wait, who? Jane Swift, acting. I've been elected. That's what I've been. Okay, and we have, here in our Falmouth area, we have. I can only think of men as state reps and state senators, and I'm talking currently. I didn't say never in the history of the world. I'm just saying currently our representation is very masculine. We have some women on the board of select men. But clearly there is a trend here, right? So I would like to ask you, gentlemen, how you would address issues of wage inequality, sexual assault, women's health issues that are being mandated by policy. So given the fact that you currently are the gender that you are, how would you be able to address some of these issues, also considering the people who you're working with on Beacon Hill are largely men? And I would like to begin with Jay Gonzalez.
So, not a lot I can do about being a man. But I think what matters is what your leader is going to do to help address inequality, which is pervasive and continues to exist and is a huge problem. And this is a priority of mine. If you go to my website, you will find a whole series of proposals I made months ago on this, which include things like state government being a leader in this area. I have said that I would have an independent assessment done of state compensation for the state workforce to ensure that we are complying with the equal pay laws here in Massachusetts. I have said that I would ensure that any business that contracts with state government would be subject to an audit by state government to ensure that they are complying with gender pay equity laws. I have said that I would require any business doing business with state government that their board has to have at least 30% representation of women and minorities on their board. This is a huge problem in Massachusetts, where we don't have enough women and enough companies prioritizing putting women in leadership positions and on corporate boards. So I want state government to be a leader and to lead by example on this issue, and to use the bully pulpit to push the private sector and other institutions to do the same. Sexual assault and harassment. This is a horrific, pervasive issue we have learned through the Me Too movement, thanks to the courageous voices of many women across this country. And we have to get serious about it. I have proposed that the casino in Everett, which is owned by and being developed by Wynn Company, that even though Steve Wynn is no longer a part of that company, that the Gaming Commission should yank the license from this company because they knew about this abhorrent criminal behavior. They did nothing about it. They didn't disclose it. And they are not suitable to hold this exclusive privilege in Massachusetts. And their license should be yanked. We got to not only hold the men who engage in this terrible conduct accountable, we need to hold the institutions who enable it accountable as well.
Okay. Time's up. Setti Warren, will you please respond to the women issue?
So I too also agree we should revoke the license for Steve Wynn. I had made the request many months ago that not only should Steve Wynn withdraw his interest, but we should also hold responsible the people that shielded the information from getting to the Gaming Commission. These requests have not been met. So I do believe we need to revoke that license. The Gaming Commission should. Look, on the sexual assault issue and sexual harassment, we have got to make sure Beacon Hill has in place legislation and rules that protect women. We've got to make sure there's a place where they can go that's safe. Senator Jamie Eldridge proposed a third-party commission to allow for women to report if they are victims of sexual harassment or assault. That needs to be put in place now. We need to make sure that when someone is a victim and they report that, it is taken seriously and there is zero tolerance. There are recommendations from the Women's Caucus that have been put forth that also need to be passed in this regard. We have policies, and I put in place policies in Newton that reflect what I just said. We made sure that we also had training for every employee around sexual harassment, in addition to making sure there was a safe place for reporting. Beacon Hill needs to assume the same responsibility, and they need to do it now. I also believe we need to ensure we pass $15 minimum wage and paid family leave. I know the three of us agree with this ballot question, but we've got to work hard to put those in place. In addition to that, we need to be investing. The majority of job creators in this state are small and medium-sized businesses. We need to be investing in small businesses that are owned by women. We need to ensure that they have access to microloans and grants. And we also need to make sure that women-owned businesses get the technical assistance they need to grow and expand their business here in the state of Massachusetts. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in regard to equity. We got to have the rules in place, and we got to make sure we're investing so that women have the same economic opportunities as men.
I'm going to keep my eye on you because I got a lot to say on this. As you're looking at the candidates, I'd like you to ask the question, not just what do we support today? What have we supported throughout our lives? Because if you look backward and see where we've been, you're going to have a really good sense of where we're going. I have fought for women's rights for my entire adult life. My mother was the victim of sexism and discrimination in her job, and I learned the lesson of how abominable that is, how unfair it is. I went to college. It had selective male eating clubs. I made the mistake of joining one. I got in there. I saw how ridiculous and horrible it was. I didn't just quit. I set up a system to fight them. We brought together grassroots of that campus. And today, through a process that we triggered, they don't exist anymore. That was 40 years ago. So I have gone on to fight for women's rights over and over again because, let's face it, every issue that we talked about, homeschool, doctor job, taking care of kids, everything is harder when you're trying to raise kids, if you're facing sexism. It is a deep structural problem that cuts across everything we talk about it. So there are special medical challenges. We have to defend reproductive rights. We have to support child and maternal health. We have to make sure that we have access to contraception. We have to make sure that we have medically appropriate sex education. We have to fight for women's rights in pay equity. We have to fight for women's rights in diversity. We have to make sure that our organizations, our leadership groups represent the half of our population, which we have not done. And I'll tell you something. In that Global Reporting Initiative standard, I made sure that there were gender equity questions all the way through that. I also just want to say, I believe we should have many more women. We are who we are, and we ran. But I'm telling you, honestly, if there were women in this race, we'd all be creamed. That's my view. And again, I didn't just say this out of the blue. I run for office before. When I left the race because of the wonderful Elizabeth Warren, I stepped down, I took the money we had left over, and I gave most of it to Emerge, which is an organization that trains women for elective office. I have the record as well as the commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So the very last question from the podium, I think it's going to be a crowd pleaser, the environment. Okay. So what role do you believe states should play and can play in combating climate change, given the current lack of commitment from the federal government in this pressing issue? And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Coastal resilience is a huge, huge issue for the Cape. And so what do you think the role the state can play in assisting coastal communities in particular? Because that is something that we're all thinking about here. And I totally forgot, so I'm just going to pick people's names out of the air. So I'd start with Jay Gonzalez this time. Obviously, I'm not keeping to whatever the format was, so I'm just throwing names around. Jay, please.
So this is the biggest threat to our planet, right? Climate change has to be a priority. Our current governor is not prioritizing it. Here's what I would do. I would accelerate our transition to renewable energy sources, which he is slow walking. I would oppose the expansion of natural gas pipeline infrastructure, which just furthers our dependence on fossil fuels. We should be investing in fixing all the holes in our existing gas pipelines instead of expanding them. I believe we should be the first state in the nation to adopt carbon pricing, which all the economists agree will be a really important incentive to driving us to a true clean energy economy faster. I also believe we need a real statewide plan for dealing with the impacts of climate change. I sit on a board at the Trust for Public Land where one of the things we focused on recently is analyzing the potential impacts of climate change. And the Trust for Public Land has been working as a consultant with the city of Boston and some of the cities along the coast to help advise them in developing plans for adapting to climate change and making sure that we're protecting people and infrastructure in Massachusetts and in those cities. Mayor Walsh has actually been a leader in working to move forward on this. Charlie Baker has been MIA on this, and it would be a priority. And certainly, as Jarita mentioned, you all have a real interest in this, living on the Cape. So we've got to get serious about climate change. The other thing I want to say is this is not only a threat that we need a sense of urgency in addressing, it is an opportunity. This is among the fastest growing industries in the world, the clean energy sector. And if we are thoughtful and intentional about it, we could create thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs right here in Massachusetts. We could be the world leader, the power plug of the world's clean energy economy. But we need leadership to do that. And I want to provide that leadership.
Thank you, Jay. All right, we're going to go with Setti.
When I think about this issue of climate change, which is the largest threat that we face, if you address climate change, you can also address social justice. You can also address economic inequality. In the city of Newton, in my 8 years, we cut the carbon footprint in half as a municipality. And that's because we drove and went big on solar, reducing energy consumption. But one of the things we also did is that we shared solar power from our municipal property with 900 of our low-income residents in the city. We actually reduced their energy, gave them credit. We should be scaling programs like this up so that we can address climate change and also address economic inequality. So let's increase solar, get rid of the artificial caps, as opposed to what this governor's done and trying to slow it down. Let's invest in renewable energy technologies. Let's invest in offshore wind. Make sure we speed that up rather than slow it down. Let's stop constructing these gas pipelines across the state. Let's put an end to that. Yes, let's put in place a carbon tax that would take that money. I support Representative Benson's bill on Beacon Hill that would take that money and help to reduce the cost for middle-income people through retrofitting and making sure that they can afford their energy better. We can also create jobs. Now, one of the things about the Cape is that you have the blue economy. You have innovation and a tech sector that we should be investing in. We have a real opportunity right here on the Cape to match what the federal government does as far as their small business and innovation research grants. We can actually match those here so that we can scale up technologies and companies that are growing right here on the Cape, provide additional jobs for people, and address climate change. Lastly, we've got to make sure we're taking care of our beaches and our coasts. It's not just about putting hard resilience measures in place. It's also about making sure we are good stewards of our coastal lands, and we are not right now under this governor. We're not putting the resources in for local cities and towns. We have a Massachusetts Department, a DEP that is being gutted and at this moment, so we're not enforcing laws that protect wetlands here and across in this area. We've got to make sure we're doing that in addition to investing in the areas that would create jobs and address climate change here in the Cape.
I have so many things to say about this. I wrote them down, and I'm going to talk fast, okay? First of all, I'm glad they're saying it's the greatest threat since the universe. But I said that 26 years ago when they were in high school, and I have fought this the entire time. I know it's funny, but it's also true. People are waking up, but I've been working on this relentlessly, and it's broken my heart as I have called out what the implications are for the coast, for communities of color, on and on and on. And people did not listen. We are now waking up, and now we need to act, but we need to act 10 times faster than if we had woken up 20 years ago. We have one of the biggest rip-offs in the history of this state with our so-called public utilities that are forcing us to maintain fossil fuel energy to the cost of $18 billion a year, sucking money out of your wallets. And why? Because they have an aging infrastructure that they can keep pulling money out of. And they serve not the public, but Wall Street. They are investor-owned. And you know who's supposed to be keeping an eye on them? The Department of Public Utilities, which was appointed by Charlie Baker, which is full of fossil fuel cronies, people who support the continuation of fossil fuel. That's an outrage. It's an outrage because it damages the planet. It's an outrage because it is preventing us from moving forward even at the moment where we should move forward. I was at UMass Boston. I ran a program called the Sustainable Solutions Lab, which looked precisely at the impact on vulnerable communities like the Cape, like resilience, but particularly communities of color around Boston, Mattapan, East Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury. They're all going to get crushed. And we don't have the money to protect them. So we have some big problems coming at us. I think we should all be moving. As governor, I will stand for this principle, move us forward. I drive an electric car today, and it's right outside. The governor should drive an electric car. The fleet should be electric. And I will bump all those DPU folks off and put people in who know what they're doing, favor the public, and move forward. And just finally, boy, I can keep going, as you can probably tell. This is an opportunity and an urgent need for dramatic change. I know how to make dramatic change. And how many of you have heard of the environmental leader, Bill McKibben? Bill McKibben has endorsed me because we've worked together for 20 years. So if this is an area that you want to see significant change in, I ask you to support me. Help me win this primary. Help me win the corner office, and you will see Massachusetts dump its commitment to fossil fuel and move into the position of leadership where we must be.
Okay, we'll have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience. I feel like the longer-haired gentleman has been raising his hand for quite some time. Yes.
Hello, my name is Alejandro Hernandez. I'm a high school teacher at nearby Hyannis, and I have a lot of English language learners who have the potential to go to college, but cannot, not because of their capacity, but because of cost. Because Massachusetts, it's behind Texas, Florida, behind New York, not at part with New York and California in granting in-state tuition to undocumented students. So my question is, in one regard for immigration, can you announce your support for Safe Communities Act and for granting in-state tuition for documented students?
Good question. Yeah, sorry, all right, Setti, will you go? I believe, no? All right, Jay, will you please answer the question first? Sorry. No, Jay. We're going with Jay. I'm feeling strong about this.
So yes, I support in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants in Massachusetts. And the first piece of legislation I supported as a candidate for governor was the Safe Communities Act, because state and local law enforcement officials should be focused on enforcing state and local laws and not doing the work of federal immigration officials, which is not their job. Particularly with a president who's asking our federal immigration officials to do stuff that I believe is inconsistent with our values as a country. And I want to give you an example. There's a woman in Springfield right now named Gisela, who is a Peruvian immigrant, immigrated here 17 years ago, married an American citizen, has 2 children born here, American citizens, followed the rules, has a work permit, paid her taxes. 3 weeks ago, Donald Trump tried to deport her. And she has taken sanctuary in a church in Springfield. Governor Baker has said nothing about this or many other situations like it. The mayor in Springfield, a Democrat, believes she should be deported and is threatening the church, sending in housing inspectors to try to deem the church in violation of housing codes, trying to strip the church of its 501c3 status. I went to that church to stand in support of Gisela and of the church, because we need to not only support laws, leaders who are going to support laws like the Safe Communities Act. We need leaders who are going to speak up for fellow human beings and make sure the people in this state, every single person in this state, deserves to know that their governor and their government is there for them. And it needs to come from here. And we've got a governor right now where this stuff does not come from here. And on the policy, he's in the wrong place. Elections are about choices. And if you elect me governor, you can count on the fact that I will stand up for every single person in this state, the Giselas and everyone else. Thank you.
Bob Massie, would you be willing to go second? Thank you.
So part of how this kind of thing works is the first person who gets to answer a question on healthcare says single payer, and then the next person has to say, me too. I support sanctuary cities. Somerville's a sanctuary city, and I'm horrified by the story of Gisela. My own church in Cambridge is also participating in a protection process like that. I want to talk about the flip side. We are a nation of immigrants. That's the core of our values. And we have a president who violates every one of our values, but particularly there. And I want to talk about how incredible, Alejandro, I want to talk about how incredible the people are. And let me give you a quick example, and I'm sorry to pull out my phone, but it's, I was at a Labor Day breakfast, a labor breakfast barely last Monday. I had the opportunity, as people were going out and it emptied out, I was thanking the people who are going out with their enormous trays. And I said to one woman, thank you very much. And she looked at me and I said, I'm running for governor. And her eyes got really big and she started to tell me her story while she's holding the tray. And I said, why don't you put the tray down? So she did. And she told me her story, which was amazing. And then I said, I'm giving you my email. And her daughter wrote me that night. I just want to tell you a little bit from this is the email I got a day or two ago. She said, my mother came to the United States 1 month shy of her 19th birthday. She had 2 kids. Anyway, she watched music videos in order to learn how to speak English. She would use what she learned with me and my sister in order to expand her vocabulary. And then she began working at the Omni Parker House as a housekeeper. And then she worked 2 jobs. And then her union helped to train her. And she came up and she got trained in banquet training. She now works in the banquet. She's bought a home, and she's got 2 of her kids who are now finished college. So that's an example of what we want, what we believe in. This woman vibrated with energy and with passion and commitment, and we thought, my God, this is someone who's come through so much. The people who come here fight to be here, work to be here, bring energy and diversity. It is insane and counterproductive that we violate our values and that we deny people like that the opportunity. So I just want to say, it is a core value. There are many, many things we can do, but ultimately, we have to stop this abuse of ICE. We have to welcome people into our community. We have to create a pathway for citizenship. We have to support the dreamers, and we need to live up to ourselves. As governor, I would not go coddle Donald Trump, like Charlie Baker has done, trying to avoid criticizing him because he's suddenly forgotten that he was a member of the Republican Party. But he's printing money to them, and we need a change so that this issue is rolled back and we welcome people the way the United States has always done.
Thank you. Setti Warren, yes, please.
So first on the tuition question, doesn't go far enough. Under my plan, undocumented students would go to public college free. So yes, I would make sure that they were eligible to do that. The second question on safe communities. After Donald Trump got elected, city councilors, members of my Democratic City Committee, as well as parents of English learning language students, came to me and said, Mr. Mayor, we need to put in place a Safe Communities Act here in Newton. So we worked incredibly hard to pull together the police, members of our community. And the reason why those parents were saying that to me is because they were saying, listen, we're going to be afraid to go to the police if we're victims of crime or if we're witnesses of crime. And we're going to be afraid to actually go to City Hall and talk to public officials. So we worked incredibly hard. I worked with my community. We ended up getting 19 co-doctors of the city council. I have 24 city councilors to pass that legislation in Newton, and I was proud of it. Yes, I support the Safe Communities Act in the state of Massachusetts. What I would be doing right now if I was your governor is convening people all across the state, mayors, town managers, select persons, right now engaging them around how important this legislation is and what it is. There's a lot of public officials that have no idea what this is. They hear scare tactics. Now, I want to end with the fact that we have a choice. Because Charlie Baker's putting out scare tactics. I don't know if you all know this. Back in May last year, Supreme Judicial Court of the State of Massachusetts actually said, the Lund decision, it was legal for cities like Newton and Cambridge and Somerville to have in place protections against Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions federalizing, making ICE agents out of our police officers. Charlie Baker, 1 month later, submitted a deportation bill that would undo that decision. Did you all know that? And he uses the same language in his executive summary that Donald Trump does. Despicable, racist, prejudiced, bigoted language. Murderers, rapists. This is the choice we have in November about what kind of state we want to be and who we are. So, yes, we all support it. If I'm your governor, I'm going to work like the devil to make sure we get that legislation passed.
Okay, so because we're running out of time, rather than have closing statements from the candidates, would you like one? No? This is the worst position to be in. I don't like this job at all. Yes, I have a suggestion from Megan.
I'll be the bad person. Maybe if the candidates have 1 minute to do a closing statement, and then I know there are lots of follow-up questions, so if folks maybe have an opportunity
To
before we are kicked
mingle,
out of the room
yeah.
to follow up with the candidates one-on-one. I'm sure they're going to be here for a little while.
Right.
Folks can sign up if you're inspired by any particular candidate. They have their workers here who can sign up, so it'll allow some one-on-one further conversation.
Okay, let's absolutely do that. I mean, the library is already closed, so obviously we're already. Okay, well, we have the key. I know a guy. So I am going to have closing statements, and I suppose we can go.
I started.
Yes, in the opposite order. So we'll start with Setti, and then Jay and Bob. So Setti Warren, please, your closing statement.
Give the organizers a round of applause. This is a great, great forum. Thank you. You all are why we're going to win this November. You all. So look, I was thinking about these Parkland kids. I keep thinking about them. Weren't they remarkable? They were remarkable. I came down here. I came to Hyannis and spoke to the young people during the march against gun violence, and was in Falmouth as well. We should take heed to what they are doing right now. They are not accepting what politicians want them to in regard to the status quo and gun violence, right? But we gotta go beyond gun violence and not accept the status quo or low expectations that this governor wants us to when it comes to educating our children, when it comes to making sure we have transportation systems that work. I believe in a right to move and addressing the addiction epidemic we have in this state. So look, here's my request. Sign up with one of the three of us right now. We got 3 great candidates. These guys are great, right? Because we're only going to win if we start organizing now. We've got to be honest and direct and ask ourselves a question. What kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? I've been asking everyone to ask themselves that question. I believe we need to be a Commonwealth that isn't afraid to asking people that are doing really well in this economy to make investments so we can end economic inequality in our state. That's what my campaign's all about, and that's what November's all about for all of us. I ask for your support. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here.
So, I agree with Setti. We've got some great candidates here. These are two great guys. We've been spending a lot of good quality time together. And if either one of them becomes the Democratic nominee, I will support them 100%, and you should too.
Yeah.
But I'm asking for your support. As I mentioned, I'm the only candidate in this race with leadership experience in state government getting big things done. I do think that experience matters. And look, we're going to win this election. We're going to win this election. I know, Charlie Baker's really popular. He's really tall. Everyone says, how are you going to beat him? But it's easy to be popular when you don't do anything. And you never take a stand, and your whole approach to the job is being cautious instead of courageous. It is one thing for someone to be asked, how do you feel about Charlie Baker? And there's a lukewarm response from a number of people. It's a different thing to be asked, who are you going to vote for? Elections are about choices. And in this case, this is going to be a choice between a governor who's made no progress on any issue that affects people's lives in a real way, no agenda to do so, and has been terrible about standing up for people, versus someone who desperately wants to do so, and in my case, I would argue, has the leadership experience to deliver on it. And I think people are going to choose that, as long as they're informed about the choice. There's going to be a huge Democratic turnout this year. The blue wave, Elizabeth Warren on the ballot, the minimum wage. Democrats are going to turn out. As long as they're informed about the choice, I am 100% confident we will win. That's where you come in. We need your help. Join our team, knock on some doors, put a bumper sticker on your car, tell your friends about why this race matters. Do whatever you can, because with your help making sure people are informed about that choice, we will win back the governor's office. We will aim high again. We will make Massachusetts a leader again, and we will make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Thank you very much.
Well, I think you can tell I get pretty fired up. But I want to tell you that ultimately, what drives me is a sense of the future. Now, we're setting ourselves on a path right now. And it's a path, looking around, some of you have been through a lot. I can tell you've lived for a while. And you've seen all the challenges that came up. And we thank all the people who went before us that prepared us for the future. But now we have to be ready for a new future. It could be a difficult future, or it could be a beautiful future. We could have a strong, sustainable, just economy that works for everyone. The economy should be serving us, not us put to work for the economy relentlessly. So I believe that's possible, and it gets me up every morning, not just my anger about what's happening, but what I'm drawn forward to do. And I want to invite you to dream big. like Dan Wolf said, the gap between what we could do and what we are doing has never been bigger. And I also want to say that I'm so excited because I agree we're going to win this election. We're going to win this election because of that blue wave. And if a Democrat can win in New Jersey and Virginia and Missouri and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Alabama, if a Democrat can win in Alabama, a Democrat can win in Massachusetts. Thank you very much.
Okay, so my role as moderator is now over, and I would like to, I don't know, is this on?
I'm going to steal.
Yeah, still one of those. We're going to let Megan English Braga close us out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Just a huge round of applause for Jarita. That's a very hard thing to do. And a tremendous thank you to Engage Falmouth for all they've done really since January. Just in my capacity as chair of the Falmouth Democratic Town Committee, I just want to thank the three of you for being here. I know it's hard to get over that bridge, especially with one lane that we've had lately.
Oh, yeah.
We screened out the questions about bridges. There were some, but but I just want to echo the sentiment of these three candidates that what we're talking about, we talked a lot about policy, but what this vote really is going to be about is really about issues that speak to the deep importance of what we believe morally, who we are as people, how we think about caring for each other, what community really means. Policy can sometimes sound dry, but what we do in terms of policy is real to individuals on a daily basis. So I hope we understand that we are not looking for folks who are pencil pushers. We are talking about decisions that really hit the core of whether or not someone can make their rent, whether they will have housing, whether or not families will be divided, the importance of justice in our criminal justice system. So these are issues that speak to the very heart of the values we have as Americans and the values we really hold as Democrats. So I hope that we all work for whomever you support now, and then whoever our final candidate is, that we are working up and down the ballot, up and down the ticket to really promote those values because they mean something. It's not about an individual, it's about the impact that policy has in the day-to-day lives of ourselves, our neighbors. So please get to work. We're gonna knock doors. Falmouth has a reputation for knocking on a lot of doors. You know there are people in this room. Lou, is he still here? If Lou has your name, you will be knocking on someone's door. So thank you for being here today. There will be time to follow up, I hope, with some of the candidates and get on somebody's list because they need you and we need you. So thank you so much.